Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the ultimate everyday battleground, and that is household chores. Look, whether you live entirely solo, with a partner, or you're navigating the wild world of roommates, you have absolutely experienced the tension of keeping a living space tidy. But instead of just having that same old argument over whose turn it is to do the dishes, we're going to completely unpack the fascinating, and honestly sometimes surprising, science behind our domestic habits. Because it turns out, the reasons we do what we do in our homes run a whole lot deeper than simply being neat or being messy. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with number 1, why some need it spotless. 2, the psychology of clutter. 3, the gender cleanliness gap. And finally, 4, solo living true baselines. Let's get into it. I want you to reflect on this incredibly relatable scenario for a second. Have you ever wondered why a dirty kitchen feels like a literal, urgent, personal threat to one person, while their roommate honestly, genuinely doesn't even notice the mess? It is so easy to just slap a label on people, right? To call them lazy or uptight. But the data actually shows us that our domestic habits are absolutely not character flaws. They're deeply rooted in complex psychological conditioning. To really understand how this works, we have to look through the lens of environmental psychology. Basically, this is the scientific study of how physical spaces affect our human behavior, our mood, and our cognition. And crucially, it explores how our own internal states, things like our daily stress levels, our sense of identity, our mental bandwidth, actually shape how we interact with the spaces around us. Put simply, our internal mental frameworks literally dictate our external reality. All right, moving to section 1, why some need it spotless. Let's look at the drivers behind the individuals who meticulously maintain pristine environments. So what is actually driving this intense need to clean? Well, it mostly comes down to something called environmental self-efficacy. That's a fancy way of describing the core belief that you have control over your surroundings. For people who score high in this trait, maintaining order produces a massive psychological reward. Through territorial marking, think of, say, perfectly arranging the throw pillows or color coordinating a bookshelf, a clean home signals competence, it signals stability. For them, cleaning isn't just some annoying chore, it's a crucial coping mechanism. A messy home creates this deeply uncomfortable disconnect between who they are and what they're seeing. And the biological data absolutely backs this up, which is fascinating. There's this groundbreaking research by Darby Saxby and Rena Rapetti, where they actually measured stress hormones in the home. And they found that people who described their living spaces as cluttered had demonstrably higher cortisol levels throughout the entire day. Cortisol is your stress hormone. So for these personalities, visual disorder literally produces a state of low-grade chronic physiological stress. Their body is basically in an active state of alarm, and scrubbing the counters or doing a load of laundry is exactly how they relieve it, which naturally creates an incredibly powerful behavioral loop. Think about it. If a clean home reliably produces a feeling of calm, the act of cleaning gets positively reinforced in the brain. Over time, that association becomes completely automatic. This actually perfectly aligns with Daniel Levitin's concept of cognitive open loops. Physical disorder actively competes for our cognitive resources. Every single dirty dish or unsorted pile of mail is an open loop, and it's just sitting there consuming mental bandwidth. It's kind of like having too many apps open on your phone, draining the battery. People with a low tolerance for this kind of cognitive load are going to clean preemptively, just to protect their mental energy. Now, what's really wild is looking at the stark contrast between these two physiological realities. For the clean-minded person, the clutter of an everyday lived-in room equals chronic stress. But for the clutter-tolerant person, that exact same room is just a neutral baseline. They are standing in the exact same physical space, breathing the same air, but they are experiencing two entirely different neurological realities. Which perfectly sets up section 2, the psychology of clutter. Let's flip the script and destigmatize the mess by seeing what's happening in the minds of those who leave things a bit scattered. So why do some people just leave the mess? It comes down to a biological phenomenon called sensory adaptation. As humans, we habituate to our environments. If someone happens to grow up in a very relaxed, maybe somewhat chaotic household, their mental framework for what a space should look like is just way looser. Their nervous system learns to treat a messy state as completely neutral. It's not a crisis. So that famous bedroom chair that's just piled high with laundry? It literally becomes invisible to them because their brain has straight up stopped flagging it as an anomaly. We also have to factor in executive function here, and this is absolutely crucial. Cleaning requires a lot. It requires planning, initiation, and sustained attention. When someone is experiencing executive overload, and that could be from ADHD, depression, or just massive cognitive load from a really demanding job, initiating a cleaning routine can genuinely feel impossible. When your energy is scarce, a mechanism called environmental disengagement kicks in. The home simply becomes a place to collapse, not a project to maintain. This isn't laziness or indifference. It's an adaptive, short-term neurological survival strategy. And for some people, a little mess is actually a performance enhancer. I absolutely love this concept. Clutter isn't disorder to them, it's stimulating context. There's research out of the University of Minnesota by Kathleen Vose that found messy environments can actually promote creative thinking and out-of-the-box problem solving. Meanwhile, really pristine environments tend to nudge people towards safe, conventional behavior. So for highly creative minds, a bit of visual clutter isn't a distraction at all. It's actually stimulating. Okay, moving to section 3, the gender cleanliness gap. What exactly happens when these internal neurological drivers collide head-on with external social conditioning? Let's look impartially at the sociological data here. Studies consistently highlight what sociologist Arlie Hochschild coined as the second shift. This is the phenomenon where women generally perform significantly more domestic labor. And environmental psychology actually explains the why behind this. Historically, societal scripts have linked female identity directly to domestic order. Because of this, women are often socialized to internalize the state of the home as a direct reflection of their personal worth. So naturally, a dirty home triggers higher physiological stress and even shame. Cleaning becomes this anxiety-driven compliance with a social contract. Men, conversely, are largely socialized to view the home very differently, primarily as a retreat to rest after external labor. And this divergent conditioning produces what researchers call the noticing gap. Because of those different learned schemas we just talked about, men genuinely perceive less dirt and disorder in shared spaces. To be totally clear here, task-based observations prove men aren't just maliciously pretending not to see the mess. Their brains literally have a much higher learned threshold for registering visual data as disorder. If you aren't conditioned from childhood to view a room as a reflection of your fundamental worth, your brain simply doesn't flag the dust on the baseboards. Which brings us to our final stop, section 4, solo living true baselines. Let's see what happens to human behavior when we completely remove those social expectations. So when we look at the cleanliness gap in cohabiting couples, the divide is notoriously wide. But look what happens to the data for solo living. When people live alone, completely without the social accountability or the expectation of being judged by a partner, that gender gap substantially shrinks. Both men and women basically revert to their true individual baselines. This is a huge revelation because it tells us that friction in cohabiting couples isn't a biological preference problem. It is entirely an expectation problem rooted in social scripts. So to summarize the science, the true baseline of cleanliness varies enormously by individual, not by gender. And we know this for sure because studies show that men who were raised in equitable households, households with shared childhood cleaning expectations, show absolutely zero noticing gap as adults. So those old tropes of men don't clean or women are naturally neater, they're merely learned roles. These behaviors are the products of early conditioning, stress physiology, and executive function. They are definitely not your innate biological destiny. As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. The person who cleans compulsively to relieve stress and the person who is perfectly content surrounded by a little clutter are actually both responding completely rationally to their internal states and their learned environments. Cleanliness isn't character, it's conditioning. So the next time you look around your living space or maybe sigh at your roommate's giant pile of mail, ask yourself, what unseen psychological forces are shaping this exact space? And when nobody else is watching, what is your true baseline? Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning the everyday world around you.